The Japanese American Citizens League is considered the oldest Asian Pacific American civil rights organization. The motto of the JCL is being a better American in a greater America.
When I think about that first generation of Nisei who were starting the Japanese American Citizens League, I really think about a group of young people who dared to imagine.
As much as I'd like to say I'd be one of those people, you know, that like stood up and formed this organization and just like stood out like a sore thumb, I don't know if I would be able to do that.
That took a lot of balls, right?
I think they're inspiring. I mean, to know that they were so motivated.
They had tremendous drive to want to fight against the type of oppression, even before World War II.
The things that we have advocated for, the laws that are in place now because of young people, it's really, really inspiring.
I'm in awe of our founders and the leaders of JCL, especially in the early days.
To think about how those people who stood out and were seen as leaders in the community were pulled away from their family immediately.
I can't even imagine the kind or the level of courage that it took.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
It is really revolutionary sometimes just to imagine something that's never existed before.
They were so brave.
I think you would have been one of them.
You know that America in 1920 is not America in 2020.
Young Nisei, way back in the late 20s, early 30s, they really had a difficult time.
They couldn't own property.
Japanese couldn't become citizens.
There were a lot of immigration issues, a lot of racial issues.
You're likely looked down on by the vast majority of Americans as a foreigner.
Discrimination was the law of the land.
Part of JCL founding, citizens is a key word there.
JCL set itself up as a very American organization.
To really understand the power that they had as citizens.
To recognize that they needed a more powerful voice.
You're rising up and you're actually making yourself a target to not only criticism, but maybe even violence.
Because this was pre-civil rights movement.
It's like the founding of our nation, right? You have these people getting together with a vision of what could be and actually getting it done.
We may not be accepted by most, but we will be someday. And this organization is going to help ensure that.
And then talk of war started, and you could see the shift in the organization to kind of a declaration of loyalty.
The war broke out December 7th, 1941. Literally within a day, 2 days, the Secret Service and the FBI sweep in to Japanese American communities up and down the West Coast, and they arrest their leaders.
Our great-grandpa was doing so well, and that's one of the reasons that he was taken by the FBI.
These were immigrant Japanese Americans, the first generation Issei, who were teachers, they were leaders of civic organizations, they were Japanese language instructors.
He was put into a camp in New Mexico.
Anybody who was standing in the community within days were literally taken away.
My grandfather was very active in the Japanese community, so he was sent to one of the DOJ camps in Crystal City, Texas.
Intelligence services in the United States had been doing surveillance for 10 years on the Japanese population.
The FBI, through the census, had an idea where Japanese were and were able to identify and accused them very, very early on.
The FBI picked up my dad the day after, on December the 8th, I believe, and he was taken to Sand Island on Oahu from Papaloa Honganji. And my family never heard from him for about 6 months.
The JACL was aware of a lot of this. They could sense what was happening, and the language within the organization turned to this sense of a need to declare that as Americans, we're as good as the next person, white, black, or whatever.
By February, the President has signed Executive Order 9066, putting the entire West Coast under the direction of a military commander. DeWitt, General DeWitt, issues orders basically declaring Washington, Oregon, half of California, and the southern half of Arizona as military zones.
JACL did oppose that, every effort was made to say, don't do anything to Japanese Americans. We're all loyal. We are all proud of being American.
General DeWitt calls the Japanese Americans enemy aliens, and that their loyalty to the Empire of Japan is undiluted by the second generation.
JACL found itself in kind of an extraordinary and unfortunate situation because it became the link between the community and the government.
A month after that, curfew orders are issued, followed by weeks later, the roundup begins.
In 2 weeks, you have to evacuate.
Everything was lost. Our home, our bank accounts were frozen.
They had to sell their business and farms.
Families lost their entire life savings.
Got to pack up everything you can carry.
My sister was 3 years old, and she had a little suitcase with her dolls and clothes. Our family number was 19053. So that was on our lapel tags, there was on our suitcases.
You will be relocated. You will be given food and shelter in an internment camp.
When we walked in, there was this oil stove and one light hanging from the center of the room, and the room was 25 by 20. And we said, oh my gosh, this is where we're gonna live?
They were trained off to Santa Anita, and then eventually the San Diego people ended up at Camp 3 at Poston.
When you see the barbed wires, it does something to you. Oh boy, we're really bad people. We're criminals, but we didn't do anything.
From what I understand, Mike Mazzocco is very strong in advocating to let us have a chance. Let us be what we can be to combat the war.
The JACL, I would say, was involved in getting the 442 established.
I'm kind of a typical story for my generation where my mother was locked up in a camp while my father was in Europe fighting with the 442 with the U.S. Army.
He wanted to prove his loyalty, as well as my uncle, who also volunteered to be in the 442nd.
Because of what those boys did, improving our community's worth and value and respect in the aftermath, was that worth it? Yes.
It's one of the most incredible stories come out of World War II.
post-war experience was the hardest part, because there was so much hate towards Japanese Americans that once they were out of the camps, a lot of communities refused to allow them to come back.
The JACL was instrumental in helping people relocate and resettle.
They formed a credit union in Salt Lake City, and it was the National JACL Credit Union.
At that time, the banks would not lend to people with Japanese ancestries.
Immigration reform was one of the first big victories that JACL achieved in the 50s.
The McCarran-Walter Act for immigration to allow Japanese Americans the right to naturalization.
JACL was involved with school desegregation in the early cases that led up to Brown versus Board of Education.
Pat Okura, who was the national president during the civil rights period.
He made it happen that the board meeting was actually here on the East Coast, and I think it was actually in DC at the time that the March on Washington was taking place, so that they were there.
Bill Montatani, he was the JACL attorney who filed a brief in the Loving versus Virginia case about mixed-race marriage.
That really was something that JACL has always embraced. How do we work with and in coalition with other communities to bring about rights for all people?
When this redress movement came about, there were, particularly on the West Coast, just overwhelming action and demand.
Clifford Ueda became the national president. He appointed me the chairman of the National Redress Committee.
The movement pushed it inside of JACL, and then they adopted the resolution, in '78.
A few of us went as a delegation to meet with Inoue, Matsunaga, Mineta, and the newly elected Bob Matsui.
Every conventional wisdom is that it shouldn't have happened. We shouldn't have been able to do it. We were too small, insignificant. We were too inexperienced. We didn't have the money. We didn't have the juice.
So many things had to happen exactly as they happened in order for them to pull this off.
I can remember talking to Harry Kajihara, who was the president, and I asked Harry, are we going to win redress? And Harry, with a twinkle in his eye, told me, Ken, we're going to get redress because we have justice on our side.
Somehow, the right people were able to convince, members of Congress, members of politics, and eventually American citizens that this is the right thing to do. It's David versus Goliath, and David won.
Vincent Chin, as we all know, was a young man in Detroit who was beaten to death by baseball bats, by two auto workers.
It really was when we as an Asian American community came together, whether it be JACL and OCA, which were the two national organizations at the time. People don't see us as Chinese American or Japanese American. They just see us as Asian American.
The Honolulu JACL took a position in support of same-sex marriages. We were the first chapter in the country to do so.
It's like, oh my gosh, I'm part of that group. That makes me part of a group that's doing what's hard and what's right.
JACL was at the forefront of the rights for lesbians, gays, bisexual, and transgender people because JACL supported same-sex marriage in 1994.
This is what it means to be American, to link your arms with fellow Americans who are not equal, who are not having the same opportunities, who don't have the same rights as you do.
I'm very moved and I'm very proud to be a JACL member.
There's a lot to be proud of for belonging to the JACL. There's a lot to be proud of in its fight in continuing to do what's right.
In the immediate aftermath, we started hearing about the scapegoating. We started hearing about people wearing turbans getting targeted, getting harassed, getting killed, getting injured. And we knew this story. We'd seen the story. So many of us had lived that story. And we spoke out firmly, strongly, and loudly. No, we will not let this happen. And we stood by our brothers and sisters across communities of color and across communities of religion, and we spoke out. No scapegoating, we stand together. And that was something that was very important to do.
What we've experienced in the last 4 years has made it really clear on why the JACL was started.
Asian Americans are being targeted during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we were very excited that the Biden administration had passed the legislation.
Every single time I hear about one of those incidents in the news, it just strengthens my resolve in saying, okay, I'm in this for the long run because this can't be allowed to continue.
The National Youth Student Council is supportive of Black Lives Matter movement, and so that's something that I know that we proposed a couple conventions ago in terms of a resolution.
The resolution that was passed regarding Israel and Gaza makes sure that the JACL advocates for ceasefire and humanitarian aid in the area.
All of the chapters have come out big time in support of reparations for African Americans.
One thing that I love about the JACL is that they're able to use that incarceration experience to help bolster the efforts of other communities.
JACL has been very intentional about creating programs and space for young people, right? Whether it's at the chapter level, the district level, or the national level.
And make sure that Japanese American youth understand that no matter who they are, no matter how much or little, or even if they don't have any Japanese American blood or history, that they are welcome, that they are accepted.
I think the youth generation wants to be heard and know that their voice is valued.
The future is really based on the young.
Nobody is born great, right? Nobody is born great. But we all have the seed of greatness in us.
It took a long time, but certainly today it is a proud organization.
We are now using the experience and the strength that we got by going through some hard times. And you know, when people suffer and they come out of it and survive, you're stronger. The community and JACL has become stronger, and we're just on the cusp, I think, of moving into a new, bigger, broader direction.